My name is Dr. Frank Jones, and I'm president of the Atlanta Medical Association. And we want to welcome you to this very important conversation that we're going to have this evening. And it comes under one of our programs that we have. It's called Ask a Black Doctor program. And the whole purpose of that is so that you will be able to ask questions of physicians and scientists and healthcare personnel that look like you and have similar life experiences. And so that's what we've tried to do today, is to assemble some experts from around the country who are very skilled and very knowledgeable about this subject area. And so we're just going to have a conversation today. We're going to answer your questions. The title of our program tonight is Keeping It Real. Should I get this vaccine? And I know a lot of you have that question right now. A lot of us have that question. People in my office I've been talking to over the past several days just flat out saying, I'm not going to get the vaccine. And so we want to really educate and inform you. We're not telling you to go out and absolutely get the vaccine, but we want to inform you and answer any questions that you may have. And so that's what we're going to spend this evening doing. Just a few housekeeping issues before we get started. This session is being recorded, and it will be available to you on our YouTube page. So we will send out a link in the chat, or we'll send the link to you via the way you register so that you can have the link. Also, if you have a question, please enter it into the chat. We do have someone that's monitoring the chat as well as myself. And so we will be monitoring that. I have gotten a lot of questions previously, and what I've tried to do is kind of combine all of them. They cover the same themes. So if your specific question doesn't come out, please send it to us in the chat. And we're going to try to answer as many questions as possible tonight, but we do have a limited amount of time. And so we may not be able to get to all of the questions, but we plan on having subsequent meetings like this over the next several weeks, because we need to continue to do this. This is not going away anytime soon. And so please bear with us if we don't get to your question tonight. Send it to us and we'll try to respond, but we will be having additional webinars covering this topic. Before we get started tonight, I also want to acknowledge our partners in this. I'm going to read them off quickly. The Emory Collaborative Community Outreach and Health Disparities Task Force, Emory University Urban Health Initiative, Georgia Gear, RISE, that's spelled R-Y-S-E, Georgia State Medical Association, of which we are a part, the Atlanta Alumni Chapter of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. I have to give a shout out to Pete Meadows and BK Edmonds, to my colleagues, although I'm not a Kappa, but I have to shout you out anyway. But I am a proud member of Omega, and so we also have a Xi Phi chapter of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity, the 1992 line, Rob Bussey. And we tried to get you from all angles. We tried to get everybody we could involved to see this. And so, again, this is how we do it with family, and so that's what we're going to do. Again, I'm president of the Atlanta Medical Association. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about us. We're founded in 1890, and we are really the founding chapter of the National Medical Association. Many of you have heard of the National Medical Association. Here in Atlanta, we represent approximately 3,000 Black doctors in the metro Atlanta area and tens of thousands of patients. We're also part of the Georgia State Medical Association. I do have to say, our president the other night introduced Ms. Kamala Harris when she spoke down in Savannah. So we want to send a shout out to our president who did that. She did a fantastic job. And now let me introduce our panelists. But before I do that, we do have to acknowledge one of our panelists that is not with us this evening, Dr. Olawudi Oladele. He is one of the medical directors for the DeKalb County Health Department. He had a sudden death in his family last week. And he is a friend and a colleague and one of the most knowledgeable and friendly people that I know. And we are all very saddened by this. But he called me concerned that he wasn't gonna be able to be here. And I was like, please don't worry about that. You take care of yourself. But if you wish it, listening, Dr. Oladele, we just want to let you know that we love you and praying for you and your family, and you have our condolences. Now let's go ahead. So I'm going to introduce by alphabetical order. And all of our panelists are very accomplished and have done a lot. So I'm not going to mention all of their credentials, but just know that they have a lot of numbers and letters behind their names. Dr. Judith Absalon is the Senior Director of Vaccines for Clinical Research at Pfizer. Dr. Tabia Akintobi is Associate Dean for Community Engagement and also the Director of the Georgia SEAL Program at Morehouse School of Medicine here in Atlanta. Dr. Carlos Del Rio, who many of you have seen almost every night on the news. He's Executive Associate Dean and the co-PI for the Emory Vaccine and Treatment Evaluation Unit. And he was very involved in one of the Moderna trials here at Emory, and he's from Emory University School of Medicine. Dr. Barney Graham, who was a late addition to our panel, but we're so glad to have you. And you'll hear a little bit more about Dr. Graham in just a minute. Dr. Jane Morgan, who's the clinical director of the Covet task force at Piedmont Healthcare here in Atlanta. We mentioned Dr. Olawudi Aladele. He's the medical director for the countywide services at the DeKalb County Board of Health. Dr. Chris Purnell, also known as Dr. Chris, the busiest woman in America, right? One of the busiest. She's a public health physician, fellow of the American College of Preventive Medicine, and Dr. Xanthia Wiley, who's an infectious disease specialist at Emory University School of Medicine. So these are our panelists, and please feel free to send us your questions. I mentioned Dr. Graham was a late addition to our panel, and I had originally reached out to one of his colleagues, Dr. Kizzy Corbett, who many of you know her name. She's one of the Black females responsible for helping to develop the Moderna vaccine. But Dr. Graham is actually her boss. And so because she couldn't make it, she recommended that Dr. Graham join us. And so, of course, I Googled Dr. Graham to see who he was and if he was worthy of coming to our show. And I looked him up and I said, just one thing, he's white. And I don't know, but the name of our program is Ask a Black Doctor. And so I emailed Dr. Corbett back, and she said, well, just talk to him. And I found not that it would matter. I mean, we're here to educate everybody, but the name of our show was Ask a Black Doctor. And when I spoke to Dr. Graham, he told me that he is married to a sister, been married for 40 years. He's got several children that are Black, and his son went to Morehouse College. And I'm a proud graduate of Morehouse College. And once he said that, he had me. And but on a serious note, Dr. Graham, we thank you so much for being here. Dr. Graham is a deputy director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease. And he told me to tell you that this is Dr. Fauci's department, but he is the deputy director, and he directs the basic laboratory research, and he led the team that developed the Moderna vaccine. So we really have some heavy hitters here tonight that are going to be able to answer your questions. So let's start out right away with some questions that you all have sent, and I kind of compiled them to get them answered. What do people want to know? And I've been asked some crazy questions, but they were good. But what are the most common questions that our community wants to know? And the first one, again, is, I am not taking this vaccine because it was developed too fast. There's no way you could develop this vaccine too fast. And so this is right down Dr. Graham's line. So he's going to spend a little bit of time explaining that this really was not done that fast. So Dr. Graham, if you can go ahead and educate us on why this was not done as fast as we think it was.
First of all, thank you for the invitation, and it's a pleasure to be here. I've worked with Dr. Corbett for about 16 years, since she was in high school, interrupted only by her time at UNC where she got her PhD. And so I am very proud of her, and she's been a big part of this whole process. And I'm just going to show a few slides describing some of the work that's gone on over the last 12 years that has allowed this vaccine to get such a quick start. And it's going to go by fast, but we can talk more about it later if you have questions. So this is the virus infecting your airway. This is what your airway looks like. These are the cilia in your airway that beat out the mucus. And if you look at a magnification of this, these little round items are the virus. It's a very small, about 10 million can fit on the head of a pin, and each one of these viruses has these knobs on it. This is the spike protein. The reason that's important is because the spike protein is the basis for the vaccine. Making a protein in its authentic shape and form of the spike protein is what allows us to make this vaccine effective. And One of the reasons we were able to go so fast is because we've been working on the spike protein of other coronaviruses for about 7 years. And we were doing that because it was informed by our work on the F protein, a similar type of protein on a different type of virus that we discovered in 2013. If you kept it in this shape, instead of letting it flip into its non-functional shape, that it made it a much, much better vaccine. And so we've transferred that knowledge onto the coronavirus over these last 7 years. It's also been informed by our work on platform manufacturing technology that allows us to go fast. So our work with Moderna over these last 3 years to work on a prototype for coronavirus if it happened to emerge, and all the planning we did on pandemic preparedness. And that was informed by our work on the Ebola and the Zika outbreaks that happened in 2014 and 16. So by the time the sequences were released on January 10th, because we already agreed with Moderna how to design this antigen and put it into manufacturing, we were able to get into a phase 3 trial in about 6 months. A byproduct of this work is the proteins that we need to discover new antibodies. And in this case, we worked with AbCellera and Lilly, and it allowed us to get a monoclonal antibody for treatment into phase 3 trials within about 5 months. So there was a lot of work ahead of time to get this done. And so within 3 weeks after the sequence was released, we knew the exact atomic level shape of this spike protein that's on the surface of the virus that we want to attack. And once we knew that it was in the right shape, we could make diagnostic assays as we did with CDC. We discovered these new antibodies, and we made a vaccine with Moderna because they have this rapid manufacturing platform of mRNA. And we wanted to go fast because we were trying to beat the new winter season. And it turns out that the other vaccines, like the Pfizer mRNA or like the J&J Ad Vector or the proteins from Novavax and Sanofi, are all using the method we use to stabilize this protein in its original native functional shape or conformation. So the way of holding this protein together in the right shape is the basis for a lot of these vaccines coming along. mRNA is something that can be made fast, but it's also something that's quite simple and elegant and is relatively safe because it delivers the RNA into your cell. And so your cell becomes the manufacturing site for the protein. It's one of the reasons this can go so quickly. And once you have the protein on your cell, it makes an antibody response. And so this preparation we did was backed up by all these new technologies that have developed over really the last 10 or 12 years. And just one slide to show the outcome of this. The phase 3 trial that enrolled 30,000 people, given a dose at time 0 here or at time 29, day 29 here, you see that out of 196 infections, only 11 were in the vaccine group and 185 were in the placebo group. And it looks like the protection started from the first dose. So even at the time of the second dose, you could see that the vaccine was protecting people out after about 10 to 14 days. So this is our group. I just wanted to introduce you to Dr. Corbett. This is her with a team that did a lot of that early work, especially over those first 6 to 8 weeks, making the protein, developing the assays, and starting the animal experiments. I'll stop there and we can go into the questions.
All right. I just wanted to give Dr. Absalom, give you an opportunity. Do you have anything you'd like to add to that? You're with Pfizer. Did you all have pretty much the same experience?
I mean, well, so that was a nice presentation, Dr. Graham. Obviously, as he mentioned, the Pfizer vaccine uses the mRNA platform, also uses the pre-fusion construct of the spike protein. And, you know, we also were able to move quite quickly in order to get to the point where we demonstrated that our vaccine is quite efficacious against COVID disease. And those data are available. They've been presented. I don't want to take time from the other presenters and from the question, but the vaccines are very similar. There's some differences in the side effect profiles, but they both essentially, achieve the same result, which is prevent disease in those who are able to take both vaccines. There is a slight difference in terms of the timing. The Pfizer vaccine, the second dose is taken after 3 weeks as opposed to 4 weeks, but that's a minor difference. But thank you for the opportunity to chime in.
Well, let's dig into some of these questions. Again, these were the top questions that we got. So that was the top one, like how can you do this so quickly? The next one was, how do you know what the long-term effects of this vaccine will be? Because it hadn't been studied long enough. Dr. Absalom, why don't you start on that one as well?
Sure, thank you. I mean, I think I think it's important to understand the context, right, of what we're doing. We're trying to address the immediate need, and that's why so many different manufacturers, in collaboration with different academic institutions, as well as the regulators all over the world, have come together to form a solution. We think that these, at least I can only speak to my vaccine, the short-term side effects are really similar to what we would expect with other vaccines and have seen with other vaccines. But obviously, we are going to continue to monitor people over the long term. But we've now presented publicly information on data that was at least 2 months after vaccination for a large number of people, in the tens of thousands, and we continue to follow those individuals. And even though these vaccines are being used and authorized under emergency use in the US and other parts of the world, the follow-up doesn't stop there, right? We continue to follow side effects over many, many years, and that's not something that's new for the COVID vaccines. That's actually part of what we do pretty routinely for all vaccines. So I think we will have more information as time comes along. But in the short term, we believe that our vaccine is quite safe.
And let me ask it a little bit different way, because again, this is how people keep coming at you. When you try to tell them, they keep coming at you. But it hasn't been around that long. How do I know that 10 years from now, I'm not going to come up with some chronic disease, or I'm not going to come up with some problem that you didn't expect? So kind of like in the history of vaccines, have we ever had a situation where 10 years down the road, something totally unexpected happened and affected everybody that got the vaccine?
So others can join in. I'm sure Dr. Graham and others have comments. I think to my knowledge, there's no vaccine that's done something to everybody, right? So we have to remember that these are vaccines try to prevent disease. They really, in essence, use our bodies to mimic an infection and essentially armor us to protect ourselves, right? So, there may be long-term side effects, but they're rare. And you have to ultimately think about the benefit versus the risk, and the large numbers of people in general that are prevented from an illness or disease who are vaccinated versus a small number that might have a side effect that one would attribute to the vaccine.
Okay. And we're going to revisit this again in just a minute. I'm coming to you, Dr. Morgan. You can kind of include that in your answer, because you have the next question that's kind of related. Doctors and scientists just want to experiment on Black and brown folks, just like they did in Tuskegee. Now, that's all we hear about, the Tuskegee Experiment, Henrietta Lacks, and some of the other things. That's the first reason everyone gives for not wanting to get the vaccine. What are your comments on that, Dr. Morgan? Heard you gave an excellent presentation a few weeks ago for your hospital.
So I think one of the things we want to remember as we speak to a broader audience is that we want to think about embracing new technology. And when we think about the question that you just asked regarding, have there been any damaging side effects or sequela or long-term effects that we've seen in vaccines, we can go back to the polio vaccine. in 1955, and the entire Cutter syndrome that occurred when these vaccinations were given to thousands of people, and they had not been attenuated enough. The way that we generally give vaccines is it is the actual disease. It's a live virus that's attenuated, meaning that it's weakened and diluted to the point that it does not cause disease in the body, but it stimulates a response such that if you were to come in contact with it, your body recognizes it. That's tried and true technology. We've used it for measles, we've used it for chickenpox, we used it for polio. But you can see even with polio, many people ended up with the disease, people died. And so you can have issues with those as well. Formaldehyde was used to as part of the preservative in one with one of the vaccines, with the Jonas Salk vaccine, and we moved to the Sabin vaccine. So we have to really understand that as we progress, that was 1955, we want to embrace some of these new technologies. And this is messenger RNA technology. And we want to sort of, walk into 2020 with a different aspect on, we should be able to develop these vaccines more quickly. We have more technology and we have more knowledge with it. Just to touch on briefly with the Tuskegee Experiment.
Yes, please.
Henrietta Lacks, if we look back in 1929, when penicillin was first discovered. And in 1932, we had a few hundred Black men who were asked to enroll in an observation for 6 months, an observation of the course of syphilis. These men were in Tuskegee, Alabama, largely uneducated, sharecroppers, no real resources, certainly no advocacy. At the end of 6 months, they were asked to continue an observation of what they understood was a blood disease. That was what it was told to them. This went on until 1972. Even by the time of 1942, penicillin was clearly identified as the drug of choice to treat syphilis. Not only was this not advised to these men, it was withheld. They developed all of the sequelae of tertiary syphilis, tabes dorsalis, which is a nerve disorder where they're not able to feel their feet, difficulty walking, difficulty with memory, completely disabled and disaffected really their families. This went on until 1972, until the government intervened. These are the kinds of things that we want to remember. We certainly don't want to minimize it, but we also have to begin to move beyond it, because we have to begin to understand the importance of our participation in clinical trials and what that means for us to have representation, to move beyond exploitation towards representation, to not think about it as
Dr. Morgan, we're going to come back to that. I have another question for you about that in just a second about clinical trials. But in terms of, should we, and Dr. Akintobi, this one's for you, should our community be afraid? Do we have reason enough to be afraid because of what happened to us in the past? Or as Dr. Morgan was trying to say, should we be able to get beyond that fear now? Because that's the first thing you hear when we talk about vaccines or trials is Tuskegee.
Dr. Jones, thank you for your question. I think, this requires acknowledgement, to Dr. Morgan's point, whether it is Tuskegee or Henrietta Lacks, and for other communities that really were defined by those that had less power, like the Nuremberg trials and so many others. We cannot develop a path forward without acknowledging what has happened. And so addressing and acknowledging the anxiety and fear that people have is the first step in terms of community engagement, before jumping to what some might feel is warp speed in us trying to round up people to participate in clinical trials. And we understand that that is not our intent. And I appreciate, Dr. Jones, that you started this conversation that way, that we want to arm people with community sensitive, scientifically sound information, but we must acknowledge where fear and anxiety exist. We don't want to get around it, but we want to really work with communities based on their understanding of what was, even though they may not know the details, as Dr. Morgan so eloquently described them. They know it was bad. They know that even though we are communities, we represent communities of color, that we represent the academy or research. And so we have to acknowledge the history, acknowledge that we are not the community, even though we look like them, and start that conversation first before discussing why participation is so very, very important. So it's not an or, it's an and.
Dr. Purnell, the public health doctor, question came up, why do I still have to wear a mask after I get the vaccine? And do I still have to do all of those other crazy public health things that people are telling us to do?
Right, so I participated in a Moderna COVID-19 vaccine trial and got my second injection as of the beginning of October, and I'm still wearing a mask. And I want to emphasize that because it's those bedrock public health principles, wearing a mask, frequent hand washing, physical distancing, avoiding cramped places, that we know is the greatest and most fundamental prevention that is available to everyone. The vaccine is not immediately available to everyone. Immunity doesn't immediately develop overnight. Immunity is built across a brief time period. So if you want to have the greatest amount of protection, you got to do what's most foundational. And we unfortunately haven't been able to explain and to communicate just how necessary mask wearing is because it's been politicized, right? Mm-hmm. There's been too much disinformation around something that I see as innocuous. I understand people get tired of wearing the mask. I understand a sense of fatigue around wearing the mask, but really it is something innocuous. I think about it like wearing a seatbelt. So yes, you must continue to wear your mask. Yes, you must continue to physical distance. Yes, you must continue to wash your hands. We have to get to a point of herd immunity. We have to get, and for others who may not know what that means, is a great amount of the population. We can talk about, is that 70%, is that as high as 85%, but a great amount of the population having immunity either through a vaccine, and definitely not naturally, immunity through a vaccine, which then becomes protective so that we can decrease spread. And we're not there yet. This is a long haul solution. This is not an immediate solution. So mask wearing keeps you safe now.
Thank you. Dr. Del Rio, just as we were starting to get excited about the vaccines coming out, we started hearing about this new mutation. And can you explain to everyone what a new mutation is and whether or not we think the vaccine is going to work for that mutation?
Well, Frank, first of all, let me thank you for inviting me to this panel. I also feel a bit of an imposter syndrome. I'm a white man as well, but I'm also a Hispanic male. And I have been involved in clinical research for many years around HIV, and I have totally agree with what has been said. As a researcher working at Grady and doing HIV trials, you have to acknowledge Tuskegee, you have to acknowledge the abuses and what has happened with the community, and you have to really takes time to build trust in the community. And for me, the biggest challenge that I saw in doing the trials with this vaccine is that we really had not taken the time to develop the trust with the community. And many of us actually built on the trust we had developed with the HIV community and the community-based organizations we work with in order to develop then the kind of support we needed for these trials. And I would say that I was very proud that our site at Grady in the Moderna study enrolled 48% of our participants were African-American and 30% were Hispanic. So we did very well because we have trust of the community. So I want to emphasize that it's a matter of really, it's a work of love, it's a work of time, and it's something that doesn't happen all of a sudden. So a lot of time is just talking to people and listening to them. The mutation has caused a lot of concern, but I would say that these are RNA viruses. RNA viruses, their job is to mutate. This is what they do. This is what they regularly do. And mutations could be bad because they can make a virus more severe or different, but they can also be good. Sometimes viruses, actually a mutation makes them less severe. The mutation that everybody's talking about right now that first was detected in the UK and now we know it's here in our country, we know it's here in Georgia, is a mutation in that protein that Dr. Graham talked about, is that spike protein. And what it does is it makes the virus more capable of attaching to those respiratory cells that he showed pictures about. And because it does that, it allows it to be more efficient at being transmitted, and it increases the ability of the virus to transmit to other people. So the concern is that because of the exponential transmission of this virus, that little increase, that increase in what we scientists call the R naught, which is the ability of the virus to transmit to others. This virus, we think, one person goes on, if you have 100% naive population, one person infects 2.5 individuals. If after 10 cycles of transmission, that leads to about 9,200 infections. If this virus is because of this mutation, the R naught increases from 2.5 to 2.9, doesn't sound like a lot, 0.4, after 10 cycles of transmission, instead of 9,000 infections, you have 42,000 infections. So what I'm concerned about is how rapidly this mutation would lead to more and more infections. And again, it's one of the reasons I think we need to be very quick at vaccinating, because the vaccines and the masks and the social distancing are the best tools we have to prevent this new mutation from spreading. So if you're concerned about the new mutation, wear a mask, don't go to parties, don't go to places with large gatherings, and as soon as you can, get your vaccine. That is the tools we have to stop the mutations from happening.
But do we think at this point right now that the current vaccines are going to be effective against the mutations?
For all we know, at this point in time, the vaccines and the monoclonal antibodies we have are effective against this specific mutation.
Okay. Dr. Wiley, you're an infectious disease specialist. A lot of people want to know, will I get COVID if I take the vaccine? A lot of people think that.
A wonderful question. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. So the answer to that is an emphatic no. So this is not a live virus that's being transmitted or being administered. So it's essentially, I like to think about it.
What do you mean by that, Dr. Wiley? It's not a live virus. What do you mean by that?
Absolutely. So the virus is not alive. So that means that the vaccine that goes into your body does not have that the coronavirus is not there, so you will not be infected by receiving the vaccine. So what the vaccine does is it offers a blueprint for the body to make that spike protein that Dr. Graham just mentioned to us. And when our body makes that protein, then our immune system kind of steps up and develops antibodies, so that if we're exposed to COVID moving forward, if we're exposed to the true virus, that our body can mount that immune response. So no, you will not receive live, true infectious virus with the vaccine.
Dr. Graham, a lot of people are asking, you mentioned RNA, DNA, people kind of put them all in one basket. So a question keeps coming up, will a messenger RNA virus have anything to do with my own DNA later in life?
Right. That's a question that comes up a lot. And it also comes up for people who want to have children. There was a question in the chat about that. And so the mRNA is the simplest possible molecule you can use to make the protein that you need for the vaccine. And it only goes into the outside part of the cell. Your chromosomes and your genes that make you who you are inside the nucleus of the cell, the part in the middle. The mRNA only goes into the outside part of the cell. It never goes into the nucleus. And so it makes a protein, and then within 24 to 72 hours, that mRNA is eliminated from the body. And so it's not there very long. It stays in the cytoplasm. It doesn't get into your chromosomes, and then it's gone.
Thank you. Doctor.
And if I could add, I could just add to that, that people might also find beneficial is that these are synthetic mRNAs, right? They're not, again, I think it's important for the audience and the community to understand, and Dr. Wiley very nicely summarized that there's no live virus, because I think this is a big concern in the community, and that it's going to change our natural parts of the body. Yep.
A colleague of ours Dr. Kimberly Manning uses an example that I love. She says that the DNA is the blueprint to your house. That's where all the information is. The RNA is a contractor that goes and does the bathroom and the walls. But then after the contractor finished working, the contractor leaves the house and leaves your house. It doesn't change, it doesn't stay there with you unless you, of course, happen to be married to the contractor, right? So the contractor disappears after they've done their job. That's the RNA. It doesn't stay there.
That's a great example. And Dr. Morgan also, and Dr. Graham kind of touched on it before, but another question is this going to affect my future fertility? Any evidence of that?
Right. There's no evidence that could happen. The RNA goes into your muscle, and then some of the protein goes into your lymph node. And then within a few days, it's gone. It doesn't get into the cells that are involved in fertility. And because it does not get into your chromosomes or your genes, it doesn't affect that part of you that makes you fertile and makes you who you are.
And something else I would add to that, in both the Moderna and the Pfizer FDA briefing documents, there were patients in both of those trials, those phase 3 trials, who subsequently became pregnant unintentionally during the trial. And so I believe there were maybe, I think 23 patients in the Pfizer trial, about 13 or 14 in the Moderna trial. So those pregnancies certainly will be followed out to term. But that also shows that there were pregnancies after these women received the injections. And so, that's something to think about. Certainly pregnancy was not studied. Pregnancy was actually an exclusion criteria for being in the trial, but that's what happens. And so certainly these women will also be followed to term. And so, more information will come. We have to remember that these vaccines have been approved under emergency use authorization, meaning all of the data is not yet available, but there's a recognition by the FDA that we are within a pandemic, and that the data that is available looks very, very promising and very positive. So we do not have FDA approval. We have emergency use authorization. So some of these questions cannot be answered at the moment, but will continue to be followed out, and that information will become available as we have it.
Dr. Absalom?
And if I could add, yeah, I know you want me to be brief, and I will, but just because the pregnancy is important, the other thing, so Dr. Morgan is absolutely right. We will follow women that became pregnant, later in the study, but we also, one of the things in clinical trials that's done around, potential side effects and fertility for pregnant women that we do look at early on are animal studies to look at the impact of vaccines and I'm trying to use simple terms, fertility in animals. And we have actually just completed that and shown and reported to the FDA that we see no evidence of any fertility issues in animals. And we are working on, although pregnant women actually are recommended if they're, healthcare workers or in one of the groups to get these vaccines under the EUA. There will be studies for pregnant women specifically to receive the vaccine, and so there will be data coming, to Dr. Morgan's point, so people will have some answers in the near future.
Okay. There's been a request if you could please type your answers in the Q&A, and we're going to be going through those in just a second after we get through these next few most common questions that came up. Dr. Purnell.
Dr.
Yes.
Let me just say that the CDC has set up something called Be Safe, and everybody who gets the vaccine is encouraged to enter their information and be safe. That's how CDC is monitoring for a lot of side effects and monitoring a lot of things like pregnant women and lactating women. Last time I talked to CDC leaders, they now have over 3,000 women who are pregnant in the Be Safe database. So there's going to be data coming out of Be Safe that I think is going to be very helpful.
Okay. Dr. Purnell, I was sitting at the dinner table with my family the other day and trying to convince my sons that they need to get the vaccine when it's available to them. And my son said, I'm young and healthy. Even if I get COVID, I'm probably going to be okay. Why should I get the vaccine?
Right. I want to answer that and answer something else that I heard as well. So I'll put both of them together. Okay. I want people to recognize that science by nature evolves, right? Meaning what we know about science continues to grow. And the fact that we have had a lot of dialogue and very transparent, meaning very clear, very open, and very authentic venues, formats, there is no wrong question, is something that I find encouraging and that I hope the community finds encouraging. And is actually a signal that accountability, meaning that the government is answerable, doctors are answerable, we're answerable to the science, and we're accountable to what's happening to people, whether or not they experience side effects. You hear people describe pregnant women and breastfeeding women who have received the vaccine that are reporting to the CDC. You hear people describe animal studies that continue to explore issues around fertility. All of that is encouraging, and all of that is distinctly different from the historical racist traumatic experiences that have happened in the past, where things were done in a very cloaked environment. So I want to give that as a sign to the community, what you look for, right? I'm a health equity doc, so that's what I live in, and that's what I focus on. So to the young person who says, you know, if I get coronavirus, I'm young, I'm likely to recover, so I don't need to take the vaccine. That, while there is truth to the fact that the older you are, the more severe disease, that doesn't erase the opportunity or the potential for a young person to have a catastrophic outcome from coronavirus. Not only could you potentially have a catastrophic outcome, meaning not only could you lose your life, we have young people who have chronic health conditions that put you at risk for worse outcomes, but also you could be left with what we say is morbidity, but meaning lingering effects. My sister, look, I tell people the epicenter of the coronavirus was in New York and New Jersey in the spring, and definitely in Newark, New Jersey, where my community is and where I work. But this thing landed on me personally. I lost my father to this pandemic. Not only did I lose my father, but my sister, who's a breast cancer survivor, is what we call a long hauler. So say you're a young person. So say coronavirus doesn't kill you, but coronavirus leaves you with lingering effects that fundamentally changes your life. That's not a risk that I think any person would want to take. My sister took approximately 9 months to be able to breathe without supplemental oxygen. She has not been able to return to work. And we don't want to see other people not only lose their lives, but be left with such devastation or such disability or such morbidity. So that's not a risk you should take. And though you may not get sick, and I've had this discussion in church, so if any of the church friends are listening, you can say Dr. Chris is like hammering this home.
Amen.
Virtual service, amen and hallelujah. The fact that you might get infected, meaning and have asymptomatic disease and maybe never express symptoms, but you can still transmit it, right? And so while we don't have the definitive science that is suggestive of the data that potentially the vaccine may actually improve asymptomatic spread. So there are multiple reasons why the vaccine could be a benefit than just saying, okay, a roll of the dice. I'm going to try to wing it. I'm young. I'll get through this.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that testimony. Dr. Del Rio, all these new medications that we have out now that seem to be working, are they a cure for COVID? Is there a cure for COVID right now?
Well, there is no cure for COVID. And I would say that even though we're doing a lot of research and trying to find therapies for COVID, the advance we have in therapies is much less promising than the advance we have in the vaccines, honestly. We have some drugs that work with people who have very severe COVID in the hospital. We have some drugs like the monoclonal antibodies that seem to decrease the risk of progressing. So somebody, let's say a 67-year-old person who's diagnosed with COVID and is not sick enough to go to the hospital, by giving the monoclonal antibody, you may prevent them from getting sick and getting into the hospital. But we still don't have something like, like the pill for the flu, something you can take and will take care of it. So right now, and I want to emphasize what Dr. Purnell said, you don't want to get COVID. I've been in the hospital. I'm an infectious disease doctor, a practicing physician like Dr. Santhia Wiley, and I will tell you that I am so tired of seeing people very sick and even die from COVID, because quite frankly, we don't have many good therapies. We don't have many good antivirals. We don't have a lot to do. We've learned a lot about managing, but also even if they survive, as it was said, the long-term consequences, and some of them are pretty severe. I have a very good friend of mine who was, in his 50s, an athlete, a skier. He's still in a wheelchair. He has not fully recovered. So I just tell people, you don't want to get COVID because we don't have good therapies yet. Research will get us good therapies, but quite frankly, the vaccines happen a lot faster than the therapies.
Thank you.
And can I add something? Oh, go on.
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to add something else that you may be able to tell your son. So something else that I'm telling people is that your choice to get the vaccine is a personal choice. However, the benefits of getting the vaccine will benefit your grandmother, will benefit your loved one, will benefit your church members, will benefit, the kind of will offer benefits globally. So the decision to receive the vaccine is not just about you, it's about your loved ones and getting us all out of this pandemic as early as we can possibly get out of it.
Okay. Dr. Absalon, so if someone has COVID, will getting the vaccine help?
So, I can speak to what we've seen in the clinical trials. So just to remind people, we enrolled, and to be honest, all of the different manufacturers that are making these vaccines have, taken a very similar approach in the clinical trial. So large numbers of people were enrolled. So over 44,000 individuals were, 16 years of age and older participated. We really wanted to see what happens when you're vaccinated if you didn't have the SARS-CoV infection beforehand and whether it prevented disease. But obviously, not obviously, we didn't necessarily screen people out, right? So in fact, we did have people who had COVID, maybe didn't know it. We had people that had infection before they were vaccinated. And when we looked at how well the vaccine prevented COVID, it was essentially the same in both groups. And I looked through the chat earlier, and I didn't realize when I was talking that someone wanted me to explain what efficacious meant. So I'll take the opportunity to say that now. It really just means how well the vaccines work, right? What we have tried to do is look if the vaccination prevents you from getting sick. Basic as that. And we have demonstrated that that's what it does. So that's what efficacious means.
And I'll just add with the again back to the FDA briefing documents. Dr. Absalon is absolutely correct, and so there were a certain number of patients that did have COVID and that also received the vaccine. Again, this is not part of the inclusion criteria, but things happen in trial. So that cohort of patients, around 300 or so patients, would also be followed. But something to keep in mind that we are, looking and advising our patients, if you've had COVID and you're still within 90 days of your infection, our thinking is that you still have immunity. And yes, you should get the vaccine, but we're advising that you get the vaccine after that 90-day period because you do still have some immunity during that 90-day period. So just something else to keep in mind.
Dr. Akintobi, these were just the top 10 that we've gone through. I say the last one for you. This is the one I find very interesting. Should people that didn't wear the mask, that didn't social distance, that didn't stay home, should they be allowed to get the vaccine ahead of other people that did what they were supposed to do?
Well, we know that those are among the questions that a lot of the community are asking now. My phone has been blowing up, particularly today, because just yesterday we were very thoughtful about having some of our civil rights icons in Atlanta to get the vaccine. And the questions that have come up since then are, is this just for those who can afford it? how is the access to the vaccine going to be democratized, meaning how can those who want to get it, get it? And I will start with just one thing, and that is just going back to the issue of trust or mistrust. We know a lot about the history, but we also know in a lot of conversations that we've had in collaboration with NIH at the cusp of COVID this year, is that while Black and Latinx communities have not been represented in vaccine trials historically, what they have told us is that if the messenger is one that they trust and the message is one that resonates with them, they will participate. And so what we are trying to do with initiatives like Georgia SEAL, which is the Community Engaged Alliance Against COVID, is to do what this association intends to do, and that is to flip that script, right? We know that in vaccine trials and other clinical trials, we are determining whether people are eligible to participate. But we want to flip that script to empower communities and to hold ourselves accountable such that we continue to be eligible of the community's trust, particularly in times like this. And so Georgia SEAL is a great opportunity to answer these questions, and certainly for this audience, whether you're community or clinical, to be a part of what we're doing statewide. And that is to engage communities in both outreach and research, to not just to dispel the myths related to COVID, but to respond to the questions like that which you've asked. Those who didn't do what they were supposed to do are still eligible to participate, and we want to democratize that access. And so Georgia SEAL, I'll put my email in the chat, is designed to bring together clinicians as well as community leaders to have those community discussions, to bring together efforts in the clinical space and in the community that must work together to address COVID. And specifically, we want to promote and facilitate inclusion of diverse racial and ethnic populations in COVID trials. That's what this conversation is about. And certainly we want to be sure that everyone who is interested, whether you're a clinician or a community leader, are a part of these discussions toward action. So we're represented, and such that we really turn the tide, and there are more of us who are surviving and thriving post-COVID. So long answer to your short question, but I hope it was helpful.
It was, but one second, Dr. Del Rio, I'm going to put Dr. Akintobi on the spot. Beautiful answer, eloquent answer. But what do you think? What do you think? People want to know what we think. What do you think? If someone was out there doing what they weren't supposed to do, and I'm putting you on the spot. If you really don't want to answer, you don't have to.
No, I do. But state it again.
What do you think?
We want to be sure people hear the question again and that we give them the answer.
Yeah. So if someone purposely was flouting the public health rules that we've known for years, that would really, we know it would help us get out of this disease. You know, they didn't wear masks. You know, they didn't social distance. You know, they went to large gatherings. You know, they did everything opposite of what they're supposed to do, but yet they happen to be prioritized to get a mask. Should they be able to get a mask? I'm sorry, should they be able to get the vaccine?
I believe anyone who, armed with the facts, armed with the information, which is what we are trying to provide people, armed with information to make the best decision. If we as a community, medical community, can allow for that access, everyone should be able to participate. Because in the end, as was described by others, we are doing the greater good by having someone who chooses to be vaccinated. That's my position.
Okay. Dr. Del Rio?
I was just going to say that in the world of HIV, I've heard this over and over. You know, should this person who has been practicing unsafe sex, should they get antiretroviral therapy? Well, you know, we're here as physicians to take care of people with disease. We're not here to be moralists. We're not here to, you know, should people that smoke get therapy for lung cancer? I mean, you know, let's get over this, please. We need to treat patients. One thing that I want to say just to end is that we know the disparities that have occurred in this disease. This disease has disproportionately impacted Black and brown communities in a way that is just unacceptable. I think the vaccine is an opportunity for us to provide what I keep calling immunological equity. I want to be sure that everybody's protected the same way against this virus. And by vaccinating everybody, my concern is that if we vaccinate a lot of white people and not black and brown people, we're going to create even greater disparities like we've seen in other diseases. So this is an opportunity for us as a nation to create what I once called immunological equity. And I've been asking CDC, and I've been asking the state that not only should they give us numbers of people vaccinated, I want to hear who they are, their age, I want to hear their race, because I want to be sure that we're giving the vaccine equity and we're actually giving a vaccine to as many African American and Hispanic people as we are to white people, because otherwise we're going to see even greater disparities. So let's work towards health equity, and this vaccine is a great tool to get us to health equity, at least in our ability to respond to this virus.
I want to add one thing, and I think that we all know people who did everything that they knew to do and still contracted this infection. So if our intention is to avoid victim blaming and to do what Dr. Del Rio said, democratize access and consider the greater good for our population, we cannot penalize people for their behavior. And it shouldn't matter. It should not matter.
Can I just add one final point to that?
Yes.
I think questions like this will continue to arise because we fundamentally have not answered the fairness issue. And Dr. Del Rio is speaking about that. And the lack of speed or urgency around getting the vaccine out, I think allows this fairness issue to linger. Rightly so, we have prioritized certain populations. Rightly so, I'm a physician, I work in a healthcare environment. But, there are people in the community, elderly people who are ready to get vaccinated, but they can't get vaccinated. Yes. And we have those in the healthcare community who are still not sure if they want to get vaccinated. If we're going to speak about equity, we have to deliver on equity. Right. And we have to look at our allocation, even distribution process to say, are we thinking outside of the box? As long as we are confined, inequity is going to continue to fuel questions such as, should this person get this? Because there are people who are making movement on that decision journey, but we're not moving fast enough to meet them in their decision.
Great answers from everyone. So we're going to kind of switch gears a little bit, and these are kind of like at rapid fire, as rapid as it can be. We have 129 questions in the chat, and we're just going to try to get to some of them and the more common themes. One of the questions is, and you all can kind of jump in if you want to jump in. How often do we need to get this vaccine? Is it something that we're going to have to get over and over again? Or is this a 1 or 2 time event?
So for now, what we know is that each person needs to receive their 2 doses of one of the vaccines. With respects to boosters and receiving it on a seasonal level, we don't know that just yet. Okay. More to come.
One more comment from anyone, or we're good? Okay. Another question that comes up a lot, and actually I should have given credit to who asked that question. There's another question about basically autoimmune disease people, and where are we right now with people that have autoimmune diseases, and where do we stand with whether or not they should get the virus, and how soon should they be prioritized to get the virus? To get the vaccine.
So I can't speak to the prioritization piece, but for our trial, we did not exclude people that had autoimmune diseases, and I actually have gotten this question quite a bit in a lot of different ways that you can imagine, my work email, my personal email, my Facebook, and I say, we did not exclude people, and so as long as they're otherwise eligible, they should feel comfortable. I think, and this is probably obvious, but since I'm no longer a practicing physician, I always say you need to also make sure you talk to your physician, right? Okay. So you can look at the data from all the different trials and the different from the different types of vaccines, and there's more coming each day. But on an individual level, your questions need to be with your healthcare provider, and hopefully, most people have access to one. But for that particular question, no, I'll defer to others in terms of the the priority level for autoimmune disease.
Okay.
That's a CDC question, I think.
Here's a question that comes up a lot, and we're all friends here. We're not trying to put Pfizer against Moderna, or Moderna against Pfizer, or AstraZeneca, or anybody. This person, Kathy, says, I don't want the Pfizer vaccine. I want Moderna. You hear people that say, I don't want Moderna. I want Pfizer. I want AstraZeneca. I want Johnson & Johnson. I feel like the temperature variable can and will allow human error to seep in. So let's just hold it at that for now. Kind of explain the differences between the two, and is there an advantage or disadvantage? We're not really talking about the delivery. We understand the delivery with the temperature may be a issue. What about the vaccines themselves? Is there a difference in the Moderna or the Pfizer and the ones that we know that are coming, the adenovirus vaccines? Is there a difference?
So I'll start there. You know, there's no, again, reviewing the protocols, reviewing the data, looking at briefing documents, reading the journals. There's no real significant difference between the two. Certainly there are temperature requirements. When we look at the types of what we call significant adverse events, SAEs, that we see in the population, when we see what types of demographics there were. And since, you know, this is askblackdoctor.org, I'll speak about the Black population and the data regarding African Americans in these two trials, since these are the two that are currently on the market under emergency use authorization. So if we look at the Moderna data, there were, of the Blacks that were enrolled, they reached about 10.3% of enrollment in their safety data. We make up about 13.4% of the population. So ideally, we'd like to see that reflect the percentage that we are in the population, but certainly they approached the 13.4%. Of those 10.3%, we saw actually zero, that would be zero, SAEs, significant adverse events, in the active group in comparison to the placebo group. Placebo means that it was a control group that did not actually get the vaccine. So I think we can be confident in the phase 3 trial, of the Moderna phase 3 trial, that of the Black participants that were recruited and enrolled in that trial, that there was sufficient data that we should have confidence that we have representation and that there's efficacy, and that there will be, what the vaccine says it will do will be relevant to our population. When we look at the Pfizer data, we see something very similar. And you know, what is also interesting—
Dr. Morgan, I'm sorry, please kind of summarize it briefly. We got a lot more questions to get to.
I will summarize.
And I want to let Dr. Graham and Dr. Absalom, who are from Pfizer and Moderna, make their comments too, but go right ahead and finish. Go ahead, Dr. Morgan.
I'm sorry, I'll let the Pfizer and Moderna. I assume that they didn't want to talk over each other, so I decided to intervene and sort of make peace and talk about it.
I think, Dr. Morgan, you should actually continue, because I think you're doing a nice job, and you will summarize it. I think that's probably the better approach.
And so I'll just summarize it by saying there were not significant differences. If you want to drill down into the details, yes, but I think there are not significant differences to the point that you should identify a vaccine in which you have some preference. I think if you are offered a vaccine, you should take the one that you are offered and feel confident in it.
So Frank, I would just say that to me, Moderna and Pfizer are like Pepsi and Coke. You know, they're both soft drinks, they're both Coca drinks. You may like one, you may like the other. I'm a Moderna investigator. I took Pfizer vaccine. Why? Because that's the one my healthcare system had first, and the one they offered me first. So do I feel like I should have gotten Moderna? It is what it is, and both vaccines have similar data. So to me, now the important thing is if you get one, your second dose should be the same one.
Yeah, that's what I was going to add.
So the bottom line for our viewers is that it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't really matter.
Right. Doesn't.
I think whichever vaccine that the FDA says is acceptable, that people should feel comfortable taking it as soon as they can get it.
Exactly. Whatever is available, take it. If Moderna had been available first, I would have taken Moderna, but Pfizer was available, so I took the Pfizer.
Right. Me too.
Now, do you feel the same about AstraZeneca, the adenoviruses, and maybe someone could take a minute to explain what the adenovirus vaccine is and how that, again, briefly, how that is different from the messenger RNA viruses. Anybody want to tackle that?
The adenovirus vector, these things have been around for at least 20 years of testing. They just haven't ever been scaled up into an actual product. And they do the same thing mRNA does, except instead of being wrapped in this lipid particle, they're kind of wrapped in a defective virus that people use to carry the gene inside the cell so it can make the spike protein. So the adenovirus vector is similar to RNA. It just gets the gene for the spike protein in a slightly different way.
Okay. Another very common question.
I'll just add the J&J vaccine will also be a vector vaccine. I don't know if people are
Right.
interested.
It's also an adenovirus vector.
Yeah.
So the Novavax and Sanofi will be protein vaccines. Yeah.
And could I just make one minor comment?
Sure.
I'm not a Moderna employee. I'm a federal
Right.
employee. I just want you to know I was involved in development of this vaccine, but I don't have Moderna stock or anything like that.
Darn.
Thank you. That's good to know.
Exactly.
Good to know. Here's a common question. This is from Donna. Do you envision COVID-19 vaccines becoming an annual requirement, such as flu vaccines? And to take that a little bit further, do we think like schools and other organizations are going to demand that you have the COVID vaccine before you get to work? Where do we see that evolving over the next few months or years?
I don't think anyone will make this vaccine mandatory while it doesn't have primary approval. And the reason why I think that is a lot because we have to emphasize on encouraging people along their decision journey and getting the public to the point where we can all hear say tonight and we can shout it from the rooftops that it's safe and effective, but we know that that lands differently and we know that history is relevant. And I want to make this point really pristine. Not only is history relevant, Dr. Susan Moore is dead because institutional systemic racism is alive today. And so we know that those forces are still influencing that decision journey. And so we've had this conversation in the workplace environment, right? We're having this conversation in communities. And I can't say this with certainty, but as a public health physician, I would strongly caution industries and sectors not to yet have a conversation about making the vaccine mandatory, especially under this phase of its approval.
Okay.
I would add add to that, though, that I absolutely agree with you, Dr. Purnell, and I think when we can distinguish the policy from the politics of this, hopefully we'll be on a clearer path to what's mandated or not. And so I think that's an important point of distinction. And hopefully with the turn in things this year and the evidence, we'll be able to distinguish politics from the policies that really influence a healthier population. So all those factors certainly need to weigh into this.
Okay. Here's a question from William. Can you share with the community what legal protections are in place now to prevent something like the Tuskegee incident from ever happening again?
Well, there are a lot. I mean, to begin with, remember, Tuskegee was an experiment. Now, to start with, there are a lot of things have been put in place, like ethical review boards, like all the things that we as investigators have to go through in companies and the NIH has us go through in order to protect abuse from happening in research. And I would say that it is precisely because of all the regulations around research that really make research, I think, more and more, I would tell people the best care and the best treatment you're going to receive is actually as a research participant because of the regulations and because of all the different things that are in place to protect you, whether it's the Helsinki Declaration, whether it's all the different things that we have as investigators to be on top of. And, and we get audited, we get looked at, we get scrutinized. We work, there's also a lot of us doing research have been having community advisory boards that actually look at our data and look at what we're doing. And so there's no longer this idea of investigators are here and the community's here. There's really this partnership between, and I think what we're seeing is, I want to emphasize that Operation Warp Speed and all the things have been an incredible partnership between industry, government, investigators, community working together. And a lot of that is precisely to prevent abuses from happening, is to prevent things from one person taking advantage of others, because it could be the company, it could be the investigators, could be stockholders. But the reality is that those protections that have been put around research are precisely the results of abuses that have occurred over and over the years. But I feel more and more, as an investigator, I would tell you that I think nowadays the protections that exist for participants in clinical trials are really there to make sure that participants are protected. And I will say that as an investigator, my number one priority, especially in a vaccine study, because vaccines, you typically enroll healthy individuals, right? And as an investigator, my number one priority is the protection of the safety of those involved in a clinical trial. And that's what we do over and over. So I would say that people need to understand that the system that exists in place is there to protect, first and foremost, the safety of the participants.
Okay. Dr. Morgan, I want you to address this one because I heard you give a beautiful discussion a few weeks ago, kind of related to this. I don't know exactly what this person was getting at, but it certainly ties in. And also to what Dr. Del Rio was just talking about, clinical trials. But she asked, how can I trust this when I have been harmed by other pharmaceutical companies and almost lost my life? I have also lost so many friends and family due to pharmaceutical companies' negligence. I don't know exactly what she's referring to, but can you talk about the importance of Black and Brown communities being involved in clinical trials? And tell us briefly, what is a clinical trial and why it's so important for us to be involved in clinical trials?
So first of all, I want to say I'm sorry that those things have happened to you, the person who submitted that question. One of the things I'd like to sort of have us think about when we have this concept of a guinea pig, I don't want to be a guinea pig. If we don't involve ourselves in clinical trials, if we don't have representation, then as we take these compounds to the FDA for approval, we have no confidence that these approved drugs, when they're out in the real world, have any relevance to our population whatsoever. And what we have found, certainly in the cardiology realm, and I'm a cardiologist, is that when people are being prescribed these drugs, we then find out at that point that they're having different side effects or different difficulties with these medications, anticoagulants, heart failure drugs. And at that point, we are reporting that information to the FDA, and we begin to temper and adjust how we manage the medication in the population, but that's too late. If we had been involved in the clinical trials, those types of side effects or serious adverse events would have been elucidated or identified during the time of the trial, such that we would have had more specific data that would go to the FDA, and it would be approved based on our participation. So the question I ask is, on which end are we really the guinea pigs? Are you the guinea pig by not participating? Or are you the guinea pig by participating? And I would say we are guinea pigs by not participating, because then we put ourselves at risk of drugs that are already approved and devices that are already approved. And so we have to begin to think about how we want to rearrange this thinking of where are we guinea pigs? And we have to begin to think that we cannot allow medicine in the United States of America to continue to be practiced this way, without our participation, without any information on us, and drugs go out into real world, and then we are harmed. We cannot continue to allow the practice of medicine to move forward in this direction. We must step up and begin to enroll in clinical trials that are relevant to us, especially if you're managing chronic diseases.
Can I add something to that really?
Yes.
Because we talk about this a lot in Newark, New Jersey. There is two forms of power here. There is the institutional power, and that institutional power being the academic medical complex. And then there is the person's power, or the community power, or the collective power. right? And at times that power balance is oftentimes slanted in the direction or to the benefit of institutional power. Where communities can exercise their power is by giving demands and saying what's priority. We can use our voice to say, these are the health conditions or issues that are important to my life, that are important to my well-being, that are important to my community, and go into a partnership, right? Use that collective power to create partnerships with medicine to say, I would like to see studies or participatory action research done around these issues, and where institutions can more effectively and more equitably exercise its power is by demonstrating trustworthiness. And we demonstrate trustworthiness by not being ahistorical. We demonstrate trustworthiness by showing forth a social and a cultural fluency. And we demonstrate trustworthiness by understanding that we have to make sure availability and access are prioritized. So we have communities that may not have access to clinical trials just merely by the time requirement, merely because of their economic situation. So those are the other things that we have to talk about when we're talking about representation, because otherwise, like Dr. Morgan is saying, racism kills, right? And so racism is a system. So if that system isn't deliberately disrupted or dismantled, whether it's through the lack of representation or whether through its medical exploitation, it will still have the same effect.
And Dr. Purnell, I think that's wonderful. And, you know, we're talking a lot about institutions and community, but something else that I wanted to add is the importance of one-on-one conversations with our patients and being proactive about these conversations with our patients. So, and I'll keep this brief. A week and a half ago, I had my infectious diseases clinic and saw 10 patients, and none of them, the conversations were not about COVID. And I asked each of them, tell me what you think about the vaccine, and then let's talk about it. 9 of the 10 people said, I don't want the vaccine. The one person who said, I will take the vaccine, was a registered nurse. At the end of the conversation with those other, the remaining of them, I was able to kind of change the minds of all of these people. So to all of the physicians on the call, and I know we have a lot of patients here as well, please proactively kind of start the conversations with your patients about these vaccines. And to those of you who are patients, ask your physician who you have a personal relationship with, so we can have this dialogue. I think webinars are great, and you know, these kind of larger venues are great, but we really have to be proactive about bringing up the vaccine to our patients.
I have to add something. I just have to add one thing to what has been said. What you are hearing is that relationships matter. Mm-hmm. And they matter not just when you're trying to recruit for a trial. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a part of this take-home message. Trust and meeting people where they are, whether it's anxiety, fear, or whether they're on the fence. They need to hear from those they trust, yes, to consider the decision that they're going to make. And so I just want to emphasize that for all of us, again, community and patients who are on the phone. This forum is designed to empower you to have those discussions. And we, as a part of the clinical or academic academy, we must be held accountable to continue to be eligible of the community's trust.
Absolutely. And that really is the whole concept behind our Ask a Black Doctor platform, and that we realize that people will be a lot more comfortable asking us questions merely because we look like them, but more so because we have the same life experiences, and that we will be honest with them. And I think that is the most important thing. So having said that, briefly for each one of you, and I'll go through and ask you questions. We want the audience to see our concerns and transparencies. So, and Dr. Graham and Dr. Absalom, I will exclude you all from this unless you want to participate in this. What is your concern about the virus, other than being able to disseminate it, other than being able to get enough people to take it? Do you, and it's okay to say, no, I don't have any concerns. I have a concern, but I'll let you all say. Very briefly, Dr. Wiley, do you have any concerns about the virus? Or you're 100% fine with it? That's what people want to know.
Yeah, so I am recommending the vaccine for all of my patients. Okay. And what I tell my patients is that it is effective, and that the contraindications, or essentially the two groups of people who should just absolutely not receive the vaccine, are those who have had a severe allergic reaction to the first dose, which is most of the patients that we have, they've not received the vaccine yet, or those who have had a severe anaphylactic allergic reaction to something that contains polyethylene glycol. So there are very, very, very few patients who will meet that criteria. So I'm recommending it for all of my patients.
For you personally, do you have any personal concerns, or if I don't know if you have children, it may not be fair for me to ask that, but would you?
And that's fine as well. Yes. So I'll be honest with you, no, but I think I'm biased because I have seen so much death from COVID. When you're seeing 76% of your patients look like you are dying, I'm willing to take that tiny, rare risk to get vaccinated and to recommend other people to get vaccinated to save lives.
Okay, that's what we need to hear. Dr. Purnell?
Yeah, I'll weigh in on this because I participated in the trial before we got to this point of having emergency use authorization. So I had to ask myself that question, right? If I was going to be able to go into community and to present to community when a vaccine became available, would I first, step forward? And yes, it's personal for me. I told you all I lost my father. I lost my father in a hospital 4 miles away from the hospital where I was working. And my sister is a long hauler. And I've since lost 2 cousins, one essential worker. So I know the devastation up front and personal. I think it's important for us to talk about that because me being a doctor doesn't prevent me from knowing that devastation personally. And so because of that fuel, right, that fuel in my belly, and because I have to have an authentic conversation with community, as you can hear, I love public health. This is why I'm not a brain surgeon. I became a public health physician for this reason, connecting with community. And that's why I did the trial, but I did my homework first, right? I answered my family's questions. Are you sure you need to do this? I have chronic health conditions. And I felt solidly that the science had demonstrated enough benefit that I wasn't willing to take the risk of getting coronavirus.
Absolutely.
Right. And so I've told everybody, I'm not here to convince you to get vaccinated, but I want to make sure you have the information so you can operate in self-efficacy and making your ability to make an informed choice or decision. So I have no reservations. I had no reservations about participating, even when I got sick during the trial, not related to the vaccine, but I have chronic back issues and I threw out my back and I couldn't move and I had to get on all this medicine. So the study team had to be contacted and everything else. And people that I work with were like, do you regret your decision? Maybe the vaccine did this to you. And I said, no, it did not do this to me. So I speak from that place and need to be transparent so people know that I'm all in.
Okay. That's what the community needs to hear.
Absolutely.
Dr. Del Rio.
No, you said it, Frank. My biggest concerns are we're slow in the implementation of vaccination. The uptake, I'm very concerned that among our some of our healthcare workers, even only 30% are taking the vaccine. So I worry that we have a tool that is not being used appropriately. But at the same time, personally, I have absolutely no concerns. I've seen how these vaccines were developed. I've seen as an investigator of how safety has been a priority. I've been impressed, quite frankly, about the efficacy. I mean, we were looking, the FDA said we're going to have a 50%, 60% efficacy, and all of a sudden we get a home run. It's 95%. I mean, this is unbelievable. These vaccines are really good. I took it myself. I already gotten my first dose. I'm going to get my second dose as soon as I can get my family, as soon as I can get my friends vaccinated. I'm recommending the vaccine. I'm recommending it to my patients. I mean, I hope that we can get everybody as soon as possible vaccinated so we can get out of this mess. I want to be able to travel. I want to go be able to see my grandchildren. I want to be able to be a sort of a normal life again. I want to be able to hug people. I want to be able to meet with colleagues. I want to be able to have dinner with friends. So yes, the vaccine is to me is that vehicle that is going to get us out of this mess. I don't want to be. I mean, if people are happy, staying home and wearing a mask for the rest of their lives, then don't take the vaccine. But if you want to go back to what a life that we used to like living, then this is the one thing that in my mind is going to get us out of this mess. So absolutely, my only concern, as I said, is we're not doing it fast enough. We're not doing it well enough. We're not you know, the house is on fire and we're not doing it fast enough.
So I have no reservations.
Just hold on 1 second, Dr. Akintobi, 1 second. Dr. Del Rio, are there any special challenges that you realize in the Latinx community that may be different than
I think there are,
Black
and
community?
I've talked a lot to the Latino community. I think there's less hesitancy. I think in a lot of the Latino community, there's a lot of concern that already we saw this. I think it's in Nevada or I can't remember exactly what state, that they said, you know, undocumented persons will not be able to get the vaccine. So we know that a lot of undocumented immigrants are Hispanic, and they're concerned that they're going to be identified and they're going to be deported, and therefore they'd rather not get vaccinated than go to a clinic where they're going to be asked for their Social Security and other things. That's going to then allow them to be, you know, identified by the police and be deported. So my biggest concern is that people are concerned about what's going to happen to them, and they may elect not to get the vaccine because of the concern of being, you know, confronted by the law.
I got the vaccine.
Are there the same trust issues like in the Black community, not with the law, not legal, but just in terms of trusting science, trusting doctors and researchers? Do you have those same issues?
You know, my experience taking care of Hispanic patients is that they tend to be a lot more. Many of my patients say to me, look, I'll do what you tell me to do, doctor. You recommend something, I'll do it. You know, one time I remember I was talking to this person many years ago, and I was getting her consent to do an HIV test. And this woman said to me, you know, if you think this is something I need, just do it. Get my permission when you're doing brain surgery, but to draw blood from me, just go ahead and do it. You know? So I think that the trust is easier. There's been less history of this kind of abuse, but I would say there is mistrust right now about the biggest mistrust, and we haven't said this, and it comes from the Latino community. It also comes from the African-American community. It's unfortunately, and it was said before a little bit, is that this vaccine and this disease is linked to Trump and to this administration. And I think a lot of people see this as the Trump vaccine, and Trump developed this vaccine and he's pushing this. And I think that is something we need to, as it was said before very beautifully, you know, we need to get the politics out of this cold mess, because the reality is that is one of the concerns I have. A lot of people don't trust the current government.
Okay. Dr. Akintobi.
Well, I got the vaccine. I couldn't continue to talk about the importance of this without trying to be first in line. So personally, I had no reservations, but I made that comment earlier, Dr. Del Rio, and that is my concern, the distinction between the politics of this and the policies that will keep our community safe. And personally, I have parents who are on very different sides of the fence politically. Therefore, one chooses to wear a mask and one does not. And they are both high risk. So it is extremely personal to me. So I have concerns, and I know that my whole household is not necessarily unique. And so those are the things that concern me. I also have a senior who's about to be 18, and you know, we want to make sure she's first in line when she can before she goes out into the world. So I do have concerns just about what's happening outside of my door. But certainly the confidence in this, I have full confidence in it. The biggest issue is hopefully with our new administration, we will distinguish the policy from the politics and make this something that is just as important as wearing a safety belt.
Okay. Dr. Graham.
Well, I'll just say a few things. First, the major breakthroughs and learnings that we made to make this rapid development possible were done under the previous administration. Secondly, my youngest daughter is 36 and an architect in LA, and she enrolled in the Moderna trial. And because she trusted her daddy and I trusted the vaccine. And so that's the best recommendation I can give you for taking the vaccine. The other thing I think people should consider, and other people have said it in a different way, but eventually everybody's going to have immunity to this virus. It's either going to come through infection or it's going to come through vaccination. Within 3 to 5 years, every single person is going to have immunity. And the question is, do you want to take a 1 or 2% chance of dying? Or do you want to take a 1 in 150,000 chance of having an allergic reaction? And so I think that's really the choice people have to make.
Dr. Absalon, I understand that you have to leave, but please make any final comments. You okay?
Yeah, I was losing audio, so that's why I was probably flailing a little bit. And I appreciate that you wanted to give me an out, but while I work for the company, I was previously in public health. I was previously an HIV physician in Harlem and Washington Heights. And so I feel, very strongly, and obviously I'm on the development team of the Pfizer vaccine. So number one, I do not have reservations because I know that data as well as my colleagues and others who have reviewed it. So I feel very confident. And like many on the panel and probably many people who are listening in, COVID is very personal. We lost family members, within the first month. I live in New York City. And so for me, this has really been something that I dug in and put my head down to focus on. And am happy that I was in an organization that was able to provide a solution. I give these talks to smaller audiences. I never tell anyone, and I will not tell anyone to take a vaccine. I think Dr. Purnell so eloquently said it. My sort of driver in life has always been to make sure that our community has access and is well informed. And that is the only reason that I think that I'm on this call along with this amazing panel of people, Black, Latino, white, or otherwise. I think this is critically important for us. The other thing that I would say is my parents will be getting the vaccine. While they want the Pfizer vaccine for obvious reasons, I've told them you will take what you get. Because I want to be able, I'm a hugger. I haven't been able to hug anybody besides my 12-year-old since March. And I also will be vaccinating my son. So I think this audience, this group of panelists is not here talking to people because we want you to do something. I really feel that it's important for people to understand we're trying to give you the information to make an informed decision. But this is not, the politics really need to stay out of it because we're now into, I don't know what month. And last week, I got a message of, someone that I know who lost both of her parents in the same time frame. So we really have to think very seriously at what is going on in the world and think critically about the solutions that we have right now and what that means. And so, absolutely, I would take it, and everyone in my family would take it too.
Dr. Morgan.
I think one of the concerns I have is when you look at the Pfizer and Moderna data in their phase 1 trials. So these first trials of healthy volunteers, there were 45 patients in the Moderna trial. There were only 2 Black patients. Both of those Black patients were in the 100 microgram group, which was actually the group that ended up going forward into the phase 3 trial, which is great. But what we don't know is what the results would have been in the doses that were deselected. So the 50 microgram and 250 microgram doses that were deselected, there was no representation of Blacks in those groups. So that's one thing. When we look at the Pfizer trial, it actually is slightly worse. There were 100 patients in that phase 1 trial, and there were actually no Black people at all. In fact, there were only white people in that phase 1 trial. Both companies certainly ramped up in their phase 2-3 programs, as I said, and Moderna went up to 10.3 and Pfizer went up to 9.8. But you have to think when you go back, when the doses were being selected, and this is why I say it's important for us to be involved in clinical trials, when the companies were deciding on the doses that would move forward into more advanced and late stage clinical trials that ultimately went before the FDA for emergency use authorization, we were not represented there. And so we need to begin to think about that, and we need to begin to demand representation.
Excellent. Excellent
so
point.
Can I just make one clarification, because I think it's important, particularly with phase 1 vaccine trials. I think we have to be, so I completely agree with Dr. Morgan that from the beginning, representation of, our community and others are important. But really, for vaccine trials in phase 1, safety is the primary driver for dose selection, right? And so while that, having a smaller, and I'm speaking across the board, not just for our studies, a low number of African Americans, I think we need to be careful because we have 40,000 people or, 4,000, 3,000 that actually did get a vaccine at the dose that is being recommended, and those have been deemed to be safe and actually have demonstrated to prevent disease and not just looking at blood tests. So I completely agree that we need to increase representation from the early point, but I do not think that a lack of diversity in a phase 1 study of either one of those studies, when you're talking about a couple of hundred people versus thousands, should tip people one way or the other. And I believe all of those individuals, even from phase 1, continue to be followed for safety. And in fact, those participants, have longer term safety. So I just want to put that caveat in there as people start to think about this when they leave tonight.
And we're getting ready to start winding this down in just a few minutes. Another question did come up, and Dr. Morgan talked about dosaging, but she talked about it in a different context. But that question comes up a lot. Should everybody receive the same dose? Does it matter how much you weigh? Do other factors play a part? Dr. Graham, does everybody receive the same dose?
Well, in the Moderna trial, we studied doses between 25, 50, 100, and 250. And like Dr. Absalon said, the 250 was ruled out for side effects. The 100 was selected. 50 actually looks pretty good, and there's still some discussion about whether we should go to 50 or stay at 100, but that's going to require more research before we just make that decision without additional data. And so, maybe as we go into younger children or adolescents, we want to go down a little bit to 50. I think the dose is someplace for the Moderna between 50 and 100. And I just think that we're going to need more research. One of the consequences of going so quickly is that all the 10 years of studies in special populations or special questions like that, we haven't had time to answer all those yet. We're just answering the main question to try to get in and do the main thing, which is stop infection. Mm-hmm. So a lot of that's still going to have to be answered.
And that's exactly what a lot of the community says. We don't have the answers to those yet. So, well, I'm not going to take the vaccine. So how do we combat that?
I have to say, I've been doing this for 35 years. The data packages, the assays, the way this was done, all the animal studies, and honestly, just the elegance and precision of this vaccine is more than anything I've ever seen in 35 years.
Now explain that to the lay public. Explain that to the lay public who's saying it hasn't been around long enough. We believe it's eloquent and we understand the science and the data, but explain that to I was speaking to Dr. Del Rio the other day at Grady Hospital, one of the greatest hospitals in America. 35% of the people are going to take it. These are the workers, employees. 35% are going to take it. I may be off a little bit with the numbers. 30% are going to take it. 30% are not going to take it. 30% are undecided. How do we reach those people to say it's safe, it's effective, you need to take it?
Well, I don't think we can just say it's safe and effective and you need to take it. I think we've heard already, you have to have a relationship of trust. Mm-hmm. And that's why you're doing this tonight. I'm so glad you're doing this. But, nobody's going to take it if you just say take it. You have to have a relationship and you have to explain to people what's going on. If you give them the information, I think most people will end up making the right decision. And I think people just need information. And one of the problems, and you see it in me too, is that we tend to use jargon, and the language we use prevents people from understanding what are relatively simple concepts. I mean, most of the concepts we're talking about are relatively simple if we can just use the right words to explain them. Mm-hmm. And so I think it really just takes time and a conversation and some trust, and most people will make the right decision.
Okay. And so we're going to wind up. I'm terrible about having a hard stop, but I want to give everyone 30 seconds to make a closing argument on why we need to take this vaccine, or whatever you want to talk for 30 seconds. We're going to start with you, Dr. Morgan, and 30 seconds, anything you want to say about this vaccine.
So I took the vaccine on Saturday, the Moderna vaccine, and so I'm 4 days out. I'm feeling well. I had a little slight injection pain and soreness in my right deltoid, which is my right upper arm. I had a little stiffness. I'm also a Pilates instructor. I've taught a couple of very vigorous Pilates classes since then. I've had no disability whatsoever. I've had no fever, chills, nausea, vomiting, headaches, nor myalgias and muscle symptoms. So I will encourage everyone to take the vaccine. I've certainly done it myself, and I encourage others to step up and opt in.
Thank you very much, Dr. Morgan. I understand you have to leave, so thank you so much for participating. And we'll be calling you for the next one that we're going to have. So,
I appreciate
thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dr. Absalon?
I just want to say first, thank you for allowing me to participate. This has been an amazing panel. I just want people to continue to educate themselves, sign on to these webinars, talk to your physicians, talk to your family members who have some information, and make an informed decision. So like I said, I'm not going to tell anybody what they should do for obvious reasons, but I hope that people continue to stay safe, educate themselves, and take advantage of the tools that are available to really fight this horrendous pandemic.
Okay. Dr. Graham?
Well, after a year of stress and exhaustion, my greatest joy every evening on the evening news is to see people being vaccinated. Mm-hmm. And a lot of my friends and colleagues and coworkers and students who are being vaccinated send me their pictures, and I'm collecting vaccine pictures. If anyone wants to send it to me.
Okay. I'll send you mine.
All right. Dr. Akintobi?
I've been vaccinated. I am for it, but more importantly, for those patients and community leaders and members on the phone, continue to challenge us. Your questions are critical to answering one of Dr. Jones's questions. How do we meet people where they are, address the mistrust and anxiety? Challenge us. I think Dr. Jones' leadership in this organization is designed for you to push back so that we can collaborate with you towards you living your best life and us being accountable to you so we can flip this script. So COVID has affected all of us personally and professionally, so it will take all of us to turn the tide.
Thank you. Dr. Wiley?
So two comments. So one is that receiving the vaccine is a personal decision. However, the benefits of receiving the vaccine will help so many people. Okay. And the second is for the physicians on the call to please consider, receiving the vaccine yourself so that you can tell people, this was my experience, I did it, it may be a good idea for you. And opening up, though, that proactive one-on-one conversation with your patients and the community. Thank you.
Dr. Purnell?
Take notes. I think we've learned so much by this process that when government, medicine, and the public can all agitate in the same direction, we can accomplish miraculous things. And I say take note from an equity lens. What can we do if we all collectively came together against some of the other conditions that are plaguing our Black and Brown communities? I would say that first and foremost. And then two, continue to demand accountability. Patients demand accountability of your doctors. Communities demand accountability of institutions and governments. And colleagues, let's demand accountability of one another. I think that's what allows trust to grow. That relationship of demanding accountability of one another and demanding accountability, and speak science to power. We often say speak truth to power, speak science to power, because that's how we will fight back against disinformation.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Del Rio.
Well, again, I'm at a moment right now that I have very juxtaposed emotions. I'm incredibly sad and with the tragic we're currently living in our country, and I'm surprised that more people are not sad and angry about it. One American is dying every 40 seconds from this infection right now. Over 360,000 Americans have died from this infection. Disproportionately, they have been Black and brown people. We need to be angry. We need to be ending this right away. So I have that feeling, but at the same time, I have this feeling of hopefulness. I'm excited about this vaccine. I'm hopeful that if we can get people vaccinated, we can actually end this. So I see ourselves as having a unique opportunity to really impact this pandemic in a very incredible way. And I see how research has given us this tool. And as a researcher, I am just, excited. I mean, many of us work for years before we can see. I mean, I have been doing HIV vaccine work for a long time. Dr. Graham would tell you how I tell people when you do HIV vaccine work, you need to have a day job because it's very frustrating. Here we have a vaccine that actually works. I wish we had this for HIV, and I'm excited about vaccinating people. I'm excited about telling people you can be protected. You can no longer, after your 2 doses, you will no longer be a patient in my hospital or in my ICU with COVID. That is an amazing gift. Embrace it.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank each and every one of you again for participating. You all are busy people, and especially during this time, even busier, but you took the time because you realize how important it is to get the word out to our communities. And we just wanted to have an open and honest discussion. And this is just the beginning. We have to do this several more times, but I like what everyone said about it's the relationships and those individual discussions that you have with your patients and with your family and with your friends. So we will be calling on you again to help us participate in these. I want to again thank the audience for being here. We had a large audience, and this is going to be recorded, and we'll have it up on our YouTube page within a few days once we get it edited a little bit. I want to thank our behind-the-scene folks, Dr. Priscilla Hubbard, and some of the folks that helped to get you all here, Ms. Melissa Bishop Murphy, Ms. LeBron, Ms. Brittany Evans. Thank you to our sponsors, and I didn't call her name earlier, Dr. Erica Perry, who is president of the Georgia State Medical Association, who did a fantastic job the other day introducing our next vice president. But this is a group of, and please continue to reach out to us. And I'm talking to the audience now. If you have questions, we'll make our participants available to you as much as possible. And we look forward to seeing you next time. So again, from the Atlanta Medical Association, and this is our Ask a Black Doctor platform, we thank all of you for participating, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.